In the quaint town of Springdale, nestled amidst rolling hills and lush greenery, lived a cheerful boy named Jacob. With eyes as bright as the morning sun and a smile that could light up the whole neighbourhood, Jacob was the apple of his parents' eyes, Martha and Dan. Each day, Jacob would wake up to the gentle chirping of birds outside his window. He would rush through his morning routine, eager to start the day at Springdale Elementary School. With his backpack slung over his shoulder and a skip in his step, Jacob would make his way down the familiar streets, waving to neighbours and friends along the way. Jacob's enthusiasm for learning and zest for life made him a beloved figure among teachers and classmates alike. During class discussions, Jacob's hand would shoot up like a rocket, his eagerness palpable as he eagerly awaited his turn to contribute.
"Ooh, ooh, pick me!" he would exclaim, his voice tinged with excitement. "I know the answer!"
The teacher would smile indulgently at Jacob's enthusiasm, nodding as she called on him. "Yes, Jacob, go ahead." With a grin stretching from ear to ear, Jacob would launch into his response, his words flowing like a river as he shared his thoughts and insights with the class.
"Well, I think that's,"
he would begin, his eyes shining with passion. His classmates would listen intently, nodding along as Jacob spoke, their admiration for his knowledge and enthusiasm evident in their eyes. During recess, Jacob's laughter would ring through the air as he joined his friends in games of tag and soccer.
"Catch me if you can!" he would shout, darting across the playground with the speed of a cheetah.
His friends would chase after him, their shouts of laughter mingling with Jacob's own as they raced across the grassy field. "You're it!" they would cry, tagging Jacob with a playful tap on the shoulder. With a grin, Jacob would take up the chase once more, his heart pounding with excitement as he revelled in the joy of friendship and camaraderie. And so, in the vibrant halls and playgrounds of Springdale Elementary School, Jacob's enthusiasm and zest for life brought light and laughter to all who knew him, his presence a constant source of inspiration and joy. Jacob, with his tender heart and compassionate spirit, possessed a deep love for animals that was evident in every interaction he had. At Springdale Elementary School, located amidst a small farm, Jacob found joy in caring for the resident chickens and rabbits, nurturing them with a kindness that seemed to come naturally to him. Each morning, before classes began, Jacob would make his way to the school's animal enclosure, a skip in his step and a smile on his face. Armed with a bucket of feed and a gentle touch, he would tend to the chickens, scattering feed across the ground as they clucked and pecked around him, their feathers ruffling in contentment.
"Hello, my feathered friends," Jacob would greet them, his voice soft and soothing. "Are you hungry today?"
The chickens would bob their heads in response, their eyes bright with anticipation as Jacob poured feed into their troughs, their eager clucks filling the air. But Jacob's love for animals didn't stop with the chickens. He would also visit the rabbits, their soft fur and twitching noses capturing his heart from the moment he laid eyes on them. With gentle hands he would offer them fresh vegetables and hay, watching with delight as they nibbled away, their whiskers twitching with each bite.
"Here you go, little ones,"
Jacob would murmur, his eyes alight with affection.
"Enjoy your meal."
His classmates would often gather around, marvelling at Jacob's ability to connect with the animals, their admiration evident in their eyes. And though Jacob was modest about his talents, his love for the creatures he cared for shone brightly for all to see. As the day drew to a close and the final bell rang, Jacob would bid farewell to his animal friends, promising to return the next day with more treats and affection. As he walked home, his heart full of love and joy, Jacob knew that his bond with the animals of Springdale Elementary School would last a lifetime. After school, Jacob would return home to the comforting embrace of his family. Martha, a warm and nurturing presence, would greet him with a hug and a snack, while Dan, with his easygoing demeanour, would listen intently as Jacob recounted his day.
"Mom, guess what? Today in science class we learnt about the solar system. Did you know that Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system?
Jacob exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Martha smiled indulgently at her son. Yes, Jacob, I did know that. It sounds like you had a wonderful day at school. Dan chimed in from the kitchen when he was preparing dinner.
That's great, buddy. Maybe one day you'll become an astronaut and explore the stars.
Jacob's face lit up at the idea.
Really, Dad? Do you think I could do that?
Of course, you can do anything you set your mind to,
Dan replied, ruffling Jacob's hair affectionately. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, the family would gather around the dinner table sharing stories and laughter. They would talk about their day, discussing everything from school to work to their plans for the weekend. I'm thinking we could go for a hike in the mountains this Saturday, Martha suggested, glancing at Dan with a smile.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful idea,
Dan replied, reaching across the table to squeeze Martha's hand. Jacob beamed with excitement.
Yes, please. I want to climb to the very top and see the whole town from up there.
And so in the cosy town of Springdale, amidst the beauty of nature and the warmth of family, Jacob lived a happy and fulfilling life surrounded by love and laughter every day. Jacob was a slender boy, his frame delicate and his limbs lithe. Despite his active lifestyle, he possessed a naturally skinny physique that seemed impervious to the hearty meals lovingly prepared by Martha. While his friends eagerly devoured their lunches, Jacob often found himself with leftovers in his lunchbox, his appetite seemingly no match for the portions meant for growing children. Martha would meticulously pack Jacob's lunch each morning, filling it with sandwiches, fruits and snacks, hoping to fuel her son for the day ahead. Yet, more often than not, Jacob would return home with half-eaten sandwiches and untouched fruit, his appetite not quite aligning with the quantity provided. Concerned, Martha would gently inquire about Jacob's lunchtime habits, her brow furrowing with worry. Jacob, sweetie, did you not like your lunch today? You hardly ate anything. Jacob would offer a sheepish smile, his cheeks tinged with embarrassment.
I'm sorry, Mum. I'm just not very hungry during lunchtime.
Despite her concern, Martha would reassure Jacob with a tender embrace, understanding that each child had a unique appetite. She would adjust his lunches accordingly, packing smaller portions in the hopes that Jacob would feel more inclined to finish his meals. At the dinner table, Martha would serve up hearty portions of wholesome dishes, hoping to entice Jacob's appetite. Yet, even as the savoury aromas filled the air and the family gathered around the table, Jacob would often push his food around his plate, his appetite waning as the evening wore on. Jacob, sweetheart, please try to eat a little more, Martha would gently coax, her voice filled with concern.
I'm sorry, Mum, my stomach is already full,
Jacob would reply, his tone apologetic. Dan would offer words of encouragement, his voice warm and reassuring.
It's okay, buddy. Just eat what you can. We'll figure it out together.
And so, despite his lower appetite, Jacob's family embraced him with love and understanding, supporting him as he navigated his unique relationship with food. And though his meals may have been smaller than those of his peers, Jacob found comfort in the warmth of his family and the knowledge that he was loved unconditionally no matter the size of his appetite. One day, as Jacob bounded through the front door of their cosy home, Martha greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes lighting up at the sight of his empty lunchbox. Jacob, sweetheart, did you really finish your lunch today? Martha inquired, her voice tinged with surprise and delight. Jacob nodded eagerly, a wide grin spreading across his face as he held up the empty container for his mother to see. He didn't say anything else. Martha's heart swelled with happiness as she enveloped Jacob in a tight embrace, her arms wrapping around him in a gesture of pride and love. "Oh, Jacob, I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. Patting him gently on the back, Martha felt a surge of warmth and gratitude wash over her. At that moment she knew that her son was growing up before her eyes, becoming more independent and resilient with each passing day. With a smile, Martha released Jacob from her embrace, her heart brimming with love and pride. "Well done, my dear," she said, her voice soft and tender. "I'm so proud of you." For an entire week, a mysterious trend emerged in the household of Martha and Dan, a trend that both puzzled and delighted them. Each day, without fail, Jacob would return home from school with an empty lunchbox, his appetite seemingly insatiable as he devoured every last morsel packed by his mother. Martha would watch in amazement as Jacob eagerly emptied his lunchbox, her heart swelling with pride at her son's seemingly boundless appetite. "My goodness, Jacob, you must have been starving," she would exclaim, her voice filled with wonder. Dan would chuckle in agreement, his eyes twinkling with amusement.
"You're like a bottomless pit, buddy. I don't know where you put it all."
Jacob would grin sheepishly, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he basked in the praise of his parents. "I guess I was just really hungry," he would reply, his words tinged with a hint of mischief. Yet, despite the accolades and admiration he received from his parents, Jacob harboured a secret, one that he dared not reveal. For behind the facade of his empty lunchbox lay a truth that he kept hidden from his loving family. In reality, Jacob hadn't been finishing his lunches at all. It wasn't that Jacob didn't appreciate his mother's delicious meals, it was just that he had been using it for a different purpose. Seeing his parents' reaction, Jacob felt a pang of guilt gnaw at his conscience. He knew he should tell his parents the truth, but the fear of disappointing them held him back. So he continued to feign enthusiasm, pretending to devour his meals with gusto while the truth remained buried deep within him. And so, the facade persisted, as Jacob returned home each day to the praises and adoration of his unsuspecting parents. Unbeknownst to them, beneath the surface of their son's empty lunchbox lay a secret that had the potential to shatter the carefully constructed illusion of perfection they had created. Martha couldn't shake off the nagging feeling of suspicion that lingered in the back of her mind. Despite Jacob consistently returning home with an empty lunchbox, his appetite at home remained unchanged. Each evening, as she served up hearty portions for dinner, Martha observed with a furrowed brow as Jacob pushed his food around his plate, his appetite seemingly no greater than before. The disparity between Jacob's voracious appetite at school and his lackluster eating habits at home puzzled Martha. She couldn't help but wonder why her son seemed to have such a robust appetite during school hours, yet displayed little interest in food when he was at home. Her concern only deepened when she noticed that Jacob's energy levels remained consistent throughout the day, despite his apparent lack of sustenance. He still bounded home from school with the same enthusiasm, his laughter ringing through the air as he regaled his parents with tales of his day. "Something doesn't add up," Martha mused aloud one evening as she and Dan sat at the dinner table, exchanging worried glances. Dan nodded in agreement, his brow furrowed with concern.
"I've been thinking the same thing. It's like he's a different person at school."
Martha sighed, her heart heavy with worry. I just want to make sure he's eating enough. I don't understand why he's not hungry at home." Martha couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her heart since Jacob's strange behaviour with his lunch started. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to discreetly approach Jacob's friends, hoping they might shed some light on the situation. The first encounter took place at the local park where Martha spotted Jacob's friend, Emily, swinging on the swings. Approaching her with a warm smile, Martha struck up a casual conversation before subtly steering it towards Jacob's eating habits.
"Emily dear, can I ask you something?" Martha began, her tone gentle but curious. "Does Jacob always finish his lunch at school, or does he sometimes share it with his friends?" Emily's eyes darted nervously, and Martha noticed a hint of hesitation in her response.
Jacob usually finishes his lunch," she replied quickly, a forced smile on her lips. "He's not really into sharing food, you know?"
Though Martha sensed Emily's reluctance to divulge any more information, she thanked her for her time and moved on to the next encounter, determined to uncover the truth. The next scene unfolded at the local library, where Martha found Jacob's friend, Ryan, engrossed in a book. Approaching him with a warm greeting, Martha casually broached the topic of Jacob's lunchtime habits. "Ryan, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed Jacob's coming home with his lunchbox empty lately." Martha began, her tone gentle but inquisitive. "Does he usually eat all his lunch at school, or does he sometimes share it with his friends?" Ryan's eyes widened in surprise, and Martha could sense his discomfort as he hesitated to respond.
Yeah, Jacob usually eats all his lunch,"
Ryan replied quickly, a nervous smile playing on his lips.
"He's not really one to share, you know."
Though Martha's intuition told her otherwise, she thanked Ryan for his time and moved on, determined to unravel the mystery surrounding Jacob's lunchtime activities. In each encounter, Martha encountered similar responses from Jacob's friends, each one quick to defend him and brush off her inquiries. Despite her growing suspicions, Martha couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration at the lack of clarity surrounding her son's behaviour. But as she reflected on the unwavering loyalty of Jacob's friends, she couldn't help but admire their steadfast commitment to protecting him, even if it meant keeping secrets from his mother. As the days passed, Martha couldn't shake off her suspicions, her concern for Jacob's well-being weighing heavily on her mind. She resolved to keep a closer eye on her son, determined to uncover the truth behind his puzzling behaviour. Little did she know the answers she sought lay hidden within the depths of Jacob's heart, waiting to be revealed. With a heavy heart and a sense of apprehension weighing on her mind, Martha finally decided to confront Jacob about her suspicions regarding his lunchtime habits. Sitting him down one evening after dinner, she broached the topic with a gentle yet firm tone. "Jacob, sweetheart, I need to ask you something," Martha began, her voice tinged with concern. Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding his mother's gaze as he braced himself for the inevitable conversation. "Are you really eating all of your lunch at school? Or," Martha hesitated, her words hanging in the air, unspoken but understood. Jacob's heart raced with anxiety, his mind racing as he grappled with the decision before him. With a deep breath, he summoned the courage to respond, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty.
"Yes, Mum, I am,"
Jacob replied, his words a carefully crafted lie meant to shield the truth from his mother's prying eyes. Martha studied her son's face intently, searching for any hint of deception in his eyes, yet, to her dismay, Jacob's expression remained steadfast, his gaze unwavering as he maintained his facade of innocence. "Are you sure, Jacob?" Martha pressed, her voice soft but insistent. "I just want to make sure you're eating enough, sweetheart." Jacob nodded, his resolve firm as he met his mother's gaze with a confidence born out of necessity.
"I'm sure, Mum. I promise."
Though Martha couldn't shake off the lingering doubts that tugged at her heartstrings, she chose to trust her son's words, hoping against hope that he was telling the truth. With a heavy sigh, she wrapped Jacob in a warm embrace, her arms offering a silent reassurance of her love and support. "Okay, sweetheart," Martha murmured, her voice tinged with resignation. "Just remember, if there's anything bothering you, you can always talk to me." And as Jacob nestled into his mother's embrace, a pang of guilt tugged at his conscience, reminding him of the lie he had told. Yet at that moment he knew that some truths were better left unsaid, hidden beneath layers of deception and denial to protect the fragile facade of happiness he had worked so hard to maintain. With each passing day, Dan's confusion deepened as well, his mind grappling with the mystery of Jacob's empty lunchbox. Dan's suspicions continued to grow, and he resolved to uncover the truth behind Jacob's puzzling behaviour. With a heavy heart and a sense of determination burning within him, Dan embarked on a covert mission to spy on his son, hoping to shed light on the mystery of the empty lunchbox. As Dan discreetly observed Jacob's behaviour, a flurry of suspicions raced through his mind, each one more troubling than the last. One possibility that crossed his mind was that Jacob might be the victim of bullying at school. Dan imagined a scenario where Jacob, afraid of standing up to his tormentors, would allow them to take his lunch each day, leaving him hungry and ashamed. Another possibility that Dan considered was that Jacob might be discreetly throwing away his lunch, perhaps out of embarrassment or a desire to fit in with his peers. He imagined Jacob disposing of his food in a hidden corner of the schoolyard, his stomach grumbling with hunger as he put on a brave face for his parents. Yet as time passed and Dan continued to observe Jacob's interactions at school, none of his suspicions seemed to hold water. Jacob appeared to be well liked by his classmates, and there was no evidence to suggest that he's been bullied or coerced into giving away his lunch. Carefully concealing himself from view, Dan observed Jacob's behaviour from a distance, his eyes trained on his son's every move. As the day progressed, he noticed something peculiar, a pattern emerging in Jacob's actions that piqued his curiosity. As Dan observed Jacob from his hidden vantage point, he witnessed something unexpected and deeply moving. During the lunch break, Jacob would discreetly share his food with a group of hungry stray dogs that gathered near the school gate. Dan's heart swelled with pride and admiration as he watched his son's selfless act of kindness unfold before his eyes. He had no idea that Jacob possessed such a compassionate heart, one that extended not only to his classmates but also to the forgotten and overlooked creatures of the world. Tears welled in Dan's eyes as he watched Jacob kneel beside the dogs, offering them bits of his lunch with a gentle hand and a tender smile. Despite his hunger, Jacob seemed more concerned with the well-being of these stray animals, his actions speaking volumes about the depth of his compassion. Overwhelmed with emotion, Dan felt a surge of pride and gratitude wash over him. In that moment, he realized that his son was truly special, a beacon of light in a world that often seemed dark and unforgiving. As Dan crouched down beside Jacob, his eyes filled with concern, Jacob hesitated at first, unsure of how to explain his actions, but as he looked into his father's kind eyes, he knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer.
Dad,
Jacob began, his voice faltering as he struggled to find the right words.
I couldn't bear to see the hungry dogs outside the school gate. Every day I noticed them eagerly waiting for scraps of food. Their bony bodies a stark reminder of their suffering.
Dan listened intently, his heart breaking at the sadness in his son's voice. "Go on, Jacob," he encouraged gently. Moved by the plight of the stray dogs, Jacob continued, his words tumbling out in a rush of emotion.
I know I'm not supposed to, but I couldn't just ignore them, Dad. So I made it my secret mission to feed them. I divide my lunch into small portions and share it with the dogs, making sure they have something to eat. Jacob's voice wavered with emotion as he spoke, his eyes brimming with tears. I know it's not what I'm supposed to do, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't stand to see them suffer.
Dan reached out to place a comforting hand on Jacob's shoulder, his heart swelling with pride and admiration for his son's compassionate heart. "Jacob, I understand," he said softly. "Your intentions were pure and your compassion for these animals is truly admirable." Jacob looked up at his father, a glimmer of hope shining in his eyes.
"You're not mad?"
he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Dan shook his head, a warm smile spreading across his face. "No, Jacob, I'm not mad. I'm proud of you for caring so deeply about others, even when it's not easy." Approaching Jacob after school, Dan wrapped him in a tight embrace, his voice choked with emotion as he spoke. "I had no idea, Jacob. I am so proud of you." Jacob looked up at his father, his eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and gratitude.
"Thanks, Dad,"
he murmured,
his voice filled with humility. In that moment, father and son shared a bond stronger than ever before, a bond forged not only by blood but by a shared understanding of the importance of compassion and kindness in a world that sorely needed it. As they walked home together hand in hand, Dan knew that his son was destined for greatness, a shining example of the power of love to change the world, one small act of kindness at a time. It wasn't until he witnessed Jacob's compassionate act of sharing his food with the stray dogs near the school gate that Dan realized the truth was far more complex than he had ever imagined. In that moment, as he watched his son's selfless act of kindness unfold before his eyes, Dan realized that Jacob's actions were driven not by fear or shame, but by a deep sense of empathy and compassion for others.
Dad, please don't tell Mum,
Jacob pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper.
I don't want her to worry.
Dan studied his son's anxious expression, his heart aching at the fear in Jacob's eyes.
Okay, Jacob, he replied, his tone reassuring. We won't tell her just yet, but we need to talk about this, okay?
Dan could see the worry etched into Jacob's face as he made his plea. He knew his son well enough to understand his concerns. Martha was a caring and compassionate woman, but she could also be fiercely protective, especially when it came to her family's safety. Jacob nodded, his relief evident as he realized his father's understanding.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
Jacob's shoulders sagged with relief at his father's reassurance, but the fear of his mother's reaction still lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Martha's disappointment or anger if she were to find out about his clandestine actions. In his imagination, he saw her furrowing her brow and shaking her head, her voice tinged with frustration as she scolded him for putting himself in harm's way. He could bear the thought of disappointing her, so he chose to keep his actions hidden, hoping to spare her worry and protect their family harmony. But as he looked into his father's eyes, Jacob knew that he couldn't keep the truth from Martha any longer. With a deep breath, he resolved to confide in her, knowing that honesty was the only path forward, even if it meant facing her wrath.
Dad, you're right,
Jacob said, his voice firm with determination.
I'll tell Mum the truth, no matter what. We'll face it together.
And with that, he steeled himself for the conversation that lay ahead, knowing that no matter what happened, his family's love and support would see them through. Jacob felt a sense of gratitude for his father's understanding and support. Though he still feared his mother's reaction, he knew that he could count on his father to help him navigate the situation. As Dan walked home with Jacob by his side, Dan felt a sense of pride and gratitude wash over him, knowing that his son possessed a heart of gold, a heart that would always guide him to do what was right no matter the circumstances. Every day during lunchtime, Jacob would notice a group of stray dogs lingering near the school gate, their eyes pleading and their tails tucked between their legs. His heart went out to these abandoned animals, and he couldn't bear to see them go hungry, and so, one day, he made a decision that would change his routine forever. With a determined stride, Jacob approached the dogs, his lunchbox clutched tightly in his hand. Ignoring the curious stares of his classmates, he knelt beside the animals, offering them bits of his sandwich and fruit with a gentle hand and a soft voice.
Hey there, little guys,
Jacob would murmur, his tone filled with warmth and compassion.
I brought you some lunch. I hope you like it.
The dogs would eagerly lap up the food, their tails wagging with gratitude as they nuzzled against Jacob's hand, their trust in him unwavering. As the days passed, Jacob continued to share his lunch with the stray dogs, his bond with them growing stronger with each passing day. Yet, despite his compassion for these animals, Jacob couldn't bring himself to tell his parents about his daily ritual. He feared their disapproval or their insistence that he stop, and so he kept his secret hidden, tucked away like a precious treasure in the depths of his heart. Each evening as he returned home from school, Jacob would push aside the guilt that gnawed at his conscience, burying it beneath layers of denial and deception. and though he longed to confide in his parents about his newfound friends, he remained silent, knowing that some truths were better left unsaid. As he lay awake in bed each night, the image of the stray dogs lingered in Jacob's mind, their eyes filled with gratitude and trust, and in those quiet moments he knew that his bond with these animals was truly something special, a secret shared between him and the creatures he had come to love. After witnessing Jacob's compassionate act of sharing his lunch with the stray dogs, Dan knew he had to share this discovery with Martha, despite the conflicting emotions it brought forth. As they sat together at the kitchen table that evening, Dan recounted the events of the day, his voice filled with pride and admiration for their son.
"Martha, you won't believe what I saw today,"
Dan began, his tone tinged with both joy and concern. Martha looked up from her task of preparing dinner, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Dan? What happened?" Dan proceeded to tell Martha about Jacob's daily ritual of sharing his lunch with the stray dogs near the school gate, his words painting a picture of their son's compassion and kindness.
"I couldn't believe it, Martha,"
Dan continued, his voice filled with awe.
"Our son has such a big heart. He's been sharing his lunch with those dogs every day."
Martha's eyes widened in surprise and admiration, her heart swelling with pride at her son's selfless act. "Oh, Dan, that's wonderful. I had no idea Jacob was doing something like that." As they basked in the warmth of Jacob's compassionate nature, Dan's expression grew serious, his concern evident in his furrowed brow.
"As much as I admire Jacob's kindness, I think we need to talk to him about this. It's not safe for him to be feeding stray dogs every day, especially without our knowledge."
Martha nodded in agreement, a pang of sadness tugging at her heart. She couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt as she thought about the effort she put into preparing Jacob's meals each day, only for him to give them away to the dogs. "I know, Dan," Martha replied, her voice tinged with regret. "I just wish Jacob had told us about this sooner. I put so much effort into preparing those meals for him." Dan reached out to grasp Martha's hand, offering her a reassuring squeeze.
"I know, Martha, but we need to make sure Jacob understands the risks involved. We'll talk to him tonight."
Sitting down with Jacob later that evening, Dan and Martha approached the topic with a delicate touch, aware of their son's tender heart and the depth of his connection to the stray dogs. "Jacob, sweetheart, we need to talk to you about something," Martha began, her voice gentle but firm. Jacob looked up from his homework, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension.
"What is it, Mum? Dad?"
Martha cleared her throat, her gaze meeting Jacob's with a mixture of concern and understanding. "I know about what you've been doing during lunchtime, Jacob, and while I admire your kindness, I do need to discuss some important things with you." Jacob's heart skipped a beat at his mother's words, his mind racing with a mix of emotions.
"You mean about the dogs?"
he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he glanced at his father, who gave him an assuring look. Dan nodded, his eyes filled with compassion.
"Yes, sweetheart. We're so proud of you for showing such compassion towards those animals, but we're also worried about your safety and theirs."
Dan, with his gentle but resolute tone.
"Feeding stray dogs can be risky, Jacob. We don't want you to get hurt or for the dogs to become dependent on your food."
Jacob's shoulders slumped with disappointment, his heart heavy with the weight of his parents' concerns.
"But I just wanted to help them,"
he murmured, his voice tinged with sadness. Martha reached out to grasp Jacob's hand, offering him a reassuring squeeze. "We know, sweetheart, and we're proud of you for that. But we need to find a safer way for you to help the dogs." Dan nodded in agreement, his eyes filled with pride and admiration.
"We'll work together to find a solution, Jacob. We promise."
As they sat around the kitchen table, the atmosphere filled with a mix of determination and understanding, Dan, Martha, and Jacob brainstormed potential alternatives to Jacob's daily ritual of feeding the stray dogs.
Dan spoke first, his voice steady and reassuring.
How about we reach out to the local animal shelter, Jacob? They might have resources and support to help care for the stray dogs in a safe environment.
Jacob's eyes lit up at the suggestion, a spark of hope igniting within him.
That's a great idea, Dad! Maybe we could volunteer there together and help take care of the dogs.
Martha smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride at her son's eagerness to continue helping the animals. That sounds wonderful, Jacob. We could make it a family activity and spend time together while making a difference. Dan nodded in agreement, his admiration for his family evident in his eyes.
Exactly. And in the meantime, we could also look into ways to ensure the dogs have access to food and shelter without relying solely on you, Jacob.
Though Jacob still felt a pang of disappointment at the thought of giving up his daily ritual, he knew deep down that his parents were right. Their love and concern for his safety outweighed his desire to help the dogs in the way he had been doing.
I understand, Mum and Dad, Jacob said, his voice tinged with acceptance. I just want to make sure the dogs are taken care of.
Martha reached out to squeeze Jacob's hand, her eyes filled with pride and affection. And you will, sweetheart. Together we'll find a way to help them while keeping you safe. At that moment, as they sat together, united in their shared mission to help the stray dogs, the bond between Dan, Martha and Jacob grew stronger than ever. Anchored in a love that transcended even the most difficult of challenges, they knew that no obstacle was too great to overcome as long as they faced it together. With their love and compassion guiding them every step of the way, they embarked on a journey filled with hope, determination and unwavering dedication to making the world a better place for both humans and animals alike. The planning kept on going for a few days.
I think we should visit the animal shelter tomorrow, Jacob,
Dan suggested, his voice filled with determination.
They might have resources and support to help care for the stray dogs in a safe environment.
Jacob's eyes lit up with excitement at the prospect of visiting the animal shelter.
That sounds like a great idea, Dad. Maybe we could volunteer there together and help take care of the dogs.
Martha, who had been listening quietly from the sidelines, nodded in agreement. That's a wonderful idea, Jacob. We can also look into organising food drives to ensure the dogs have proper nutrition and care. Dan smiled warmly at his wife and son, a sense of pride swelling in his chest.
Exactly. Together we can make a real difference in the lives of these animals.
As they discussed their plan further, the bond between them grew stronger, anchored in a shared commitment to helping those in need. And though Jacob still felt a pang of disappointment at the thought of giving up his daily ritual, he knew that their new plan would ensure the safety and well-being of both him and the stray dogs. And so, with their hearts full of hope and determination, Dan, Martha, and Jacob set out to make their vision a reality, united in their mission to make the world a better place for all creatures, big and small. As Dan, Martha, and Jacob embarked on their mission to help the stray dogs near the school, they encountered several obstacles along the way. One of the main challenges they faced was convincing the local authorities to allow them to intervene. When they first approached the town council with their proposal to help the stray dogs, they were met with scepticism and bureaucracy.
It's not that simple, you see,
the council representative explained, shaking his head.
There are regulations and procedures that need to be followed. We can't just allow anyone to interfere with stray animals.
Undeterred, Dan spoke up, his voice filled with determination.
But these animals need our help now, he insisted. We can't afford to wait for bureaucracy to catch up. Lives are at stake.
After much negotiation and persistence, they finally received permission to proceed with their efforts, but not without facing additional challenges along the way. As Dan, Martha, and Jacob sat down to discuss their plan to help the stray dogs, excitement filled the room. They talked animatedly about organising food drives, volunteering at the animal shelter, and raising awareness in the community. Little did they know, their plans were about to take an unexpected turn.
As they stepped outside their home the next day, ready to embark on their mission, Jacob froze in his tracks. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw a group of council workers erecting barriers around the school gate where the stray dogs used to gather. Confusion and panic spread among the onlookers as rumours began to circulate about the fate of the dogs. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as he raced towards the commotion, his mind swirling with fear and uncertainty. What could have prompted such drastic action? Were the dogs in danger? Pushing through the crowd, Jacob approached one of the workers, his voice trembling with emotion.
Well, what's happening? Where are the dogs?
He demanded, his eyes pleading for answers. The worker paused, his expression sombre.
"I'm sorry, kid," he replied solemnly. "But the town council received complaints about the stray dogs and they've decided to remove them from the area."
Shock washed over Jacob as he struggled to comprehend the news. How could something he had worked so hard for be taken away in an instant? His mind raced with questions, but there were no easy answers. Dan and Martha rushed to Jacob's side, their faces etched with concern. "What's going on, Jacob?" Martha asked, her voice filled with worry. Jacob shook his head, unable to find the words to express his disbelief.
"They're taking the dogs away,"
he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. As the reality of the situation sank in, Dan wrapped his arms around Jacob, offering him comfort and support.
"We'll figure this out, son,"
he said, his voice filled with determination.
"We won't let them take the dogs without a fight."
And with that, Dan, Martha and Jacob joined forces within their community, determined to save the stray dogs from an uncertain fate. Little did they know their journey was about to take them on a roller coaster ride of highs and lows, testing their resilience and their belief in the power of compassion to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. As the community rallied behind them, Dan, Martha and Jacob began their fight to save the stray dogs from being removed. They organised protests, reached out to local officials and spread awareness about the importance of compassion for animals. Despite their efforts, they encountered a formidable obstacle: bureaucracy. Council regulations and procedures made it difficult to reverse the decision to remove the dogs, leaving Dan, Martha and Jacob feeling frustrated and powerless.
"We can't give up now," Dan declared, his voice filled with determination. "There has to be a way to appeal this decision and save those dogs."
Martha nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with resolve. "We need to find a legal loophole or gather enough public support to pressure the council into reconsidering," she suggested. Jacob's mind raced as he considered their options. He knew they needed to act fast if they were going to save the dogs from being taken away.
"What if we gather signatures for a petition and present it to the town council?" he suggested,
his voice tinged with urgency. Inspired by Jacob's idea, the community sprang into action, gathering signatures and voicing their support for the dogs. They flooded council meetings with impassioned pleas and heartfelt testimonies, urging the officials to reconsider their decision. But as the days passed, their efforts seemed to yield little progress. The council remained unmoved, citing concerns about public safety and sanitation. Frustration mounted among Dan, Martha, and Jacob as they grappled with the seemingly insurmountable obstacle before them. But just when they were on the brink of despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. During a heated city council meeting, a sympathetic council member proposed a compromise. Instead of removing the dogs, they would work with the community to address the concerns raised by the complaints. Relief washed over Dan, Martha and Jacob as they realised that their perseverance had paid off. With renewed determination, they set out to collaborate with officials on a plan to ensure the well-being of the stray dogs while addressing the concerns of the community. As they worked together to find a solution, Dan, Martha and Jacob learned a valuable lesson about the power of determination, resilience and community to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. With their bond stronger than ever, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together they could make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As the debate raged on about the fate of the stray dogs, Jacob racked his brain for a solution that would save them from being eradicated. Then, a spark of inspiration lit up his mind.
I have an idea!
Jacob exclaimed, his voice cutting through the tension in the room.
Instead of removing the dogs, why not relocate them to the nearest animal shelter? This was our plan all along.
His suggestion caught the attention of the city council members, who regarded him with a mixture of surprise and intrigue.
Relocate them to the animal shelter?
One council member echoed, raising an eyebrow.
But won't that just transfer the problem elsewhere?
Jacob shook his head, his conviction unwavering.
Not if we work together to ensure the shelter has the resources and support it needs to care for the dogs, he explained. We can organise fundraisers, volunteer our time, reach out to the community for donations. With our help, the shelter can provide a safe, loving environment for the dogs until they find permanent homes.
His words resonated with the council members, who began to see the merit in Jacob's proposal. After much discussion and deliberation, they reached a consensus. The dogs would be relocated to the nearest animal shelter, where they would receive the care and attention they deserved. Relief washed over Jacob as he realized that his idea had helped save the dogs from a grim fate.
"Thank you,"
he said, addressing the council members with gratitude.
"Together we can make a real difference in the lives of these animals."
With the decision made, Dan, Martha and Jacob sprang into action, working tirelessly to coordinate the relocation effort. Determined to make a difference in the lives of the stray dogs near the school, Dan, Martha and Jacob sprang into action. They visited the local animal shelter, where they met with the staff to discuss ways they could help.
"We're so glad you're here,"
the shelter manager said warmly as they explained their situation.
"We could use all the help we can get."
Dan nodded, his determination shining in his eyes.
"We want to do whatever we can to help these dogs. They deserve a safe and loving environment."
Together they brainstormed ideas for assisting. They decided to organise a community-wide food drive to collect donations for the shelter. Jacob eagerly volunteered to create flyers to distribute around the neighbourhood. "We can also volunteer our time at the shelter," Martha suggested. "We could help with feeding, grooming, walking the dogs." The shelter staff welcomed their offer with open arms, grateful for the extra help. Over the coming weeks, Dan, Martha and Jacob dedicated their weekends to volunteer at the shelter. They were determined to work tirelessly to ensure the dogs received proper care and attention. The day of the relocation dawned bright and early, with volunteers from the community gathering at the school gate to assist with the effort. Excitement and anticipation filled the air as they prepared to transport the stray dogs to the nearest animal shelter. Dan, Martha and Jacob led the charge, coordinating logistics and ensuring that everything was in place for a smooth operation. Jacob's heart swelled with pride as he watched his community come together to make a difference in the lives of the dogs they had grown to care for. With the help of the council workers and animal control officers, the dogs were carefully loaded into crates and carriers, their safety and comfort a top priority. Jacob gently stroked the fur of one of the dogs, offering words of reassurance as they prepared for the journey ahead. As the convoy of vehicles made its way to the animal shelter, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mingled with nervous anticipation. He knew that this was a crucial step in ensuring the well-being of the dogs, but he also understood the responsibility that came with it. As the convoy of vehicles transporting the stray dogs made its way to the animal shelter, a sudden downpour engulfed the town, causing chaos on the roads. Visibility became dangerously low, and the volunteers struggled to navigate through the storm. Just as they thought things couldn't get any worse, A loud bang echoed through the air as one of the vehicles suffered a blowout, forcing them to pull over the side of the road. With the dogs still on board, they faced the daunting task of changing the tyre in the pouring rain. Amidst the chaos, Jacob noticed the lone dog limping along the roadside, drenched and shivering from the cold. Without hesitation, he leaped out of the vehicle and ran to the dog's side, offering his jacket to shield it from the rain. The sight of Jacob's act of kindness touched the hearts of the volunteers, inspiring them to redouble their efforts to ensure the safety and well-being of the dogs. Together they worked tirelessly to change the tyre and get back on the road, determined to see their mission through to the end. Despite the setbacks and obstacles they faced along the way, they finally arrived at the animal shelter, exhausted but relieved. As the dogs were unloaded from the vehicles and welcomed into the warmth of the shelter, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished together. Upon arrival at the shelter, the dogs were greeted by a team of dedicated vets and staff members who were ready to provide them with the care they needed. Each dog underwent a thorough examination, receiving vaccinations, deworming treatments, and any necessary medical attention. Martha watched with tears in her eyes as the dogs tended to with compassion and care, grateful for the opportunity to give them a second chance at a happy and healthy life. "They deserve this," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "They deserve to be loved and cared for just like any other creature." Jacob nodded in agreement, his heart swelling with pride at the sight of the dogs receiving the care they so desperately needed. "We did the right thing," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "And now we can rest assured knowing that they're in good hands." However, there was another obstacle that they encountered: the lack of resources and funding available to support their cause. Without access to proper facilities and supplies, they struggled to provide adequate care for the stray dogs. "We need more blankets and food," Martha said, her voice tinged with frustration as she surveyed the meagre resources they had on hand. "But we don't have the funds to purchase them ourselves." Jacob nodded in agreement, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to find a way to raise money," he suggested. "Maybe we could organise a fundraiser or reach out to local businesses for donations." Despite the challenges they faced, Dan, Martha and Jacob refused to give up on their mission to help the stray dogs. With determination and perseverance, they worked tirelessly to overcome each obstacle that stood in their way. As they faced each challenge head-on, their bond grew stronger, anchored in a shared commitment to making a difference in the lives of the animals they cared so deeply about.
"We may encounter obstacles along the way,"
Dan said, his voice filled with conviction.
"But as long as we stick together and remain determined, I know we can overcome anything."
Martha and Jacob nodded in agreement, their hearts filled with hope and determination. Together they would continue to fight for the rights and well-being of stray dogs, knowing that their efforts would make a real difference in the world. Meanwhile, the food drive that they had planned was a resounding success. The community rallied together, donating bags of dog food, blankets, and toys for the shelter animals. Jacob was thrilled to see the outpouring of support from his neighbours. Jacob's school friends were equally enthusiastic about supporting the food drive for the shelter animals. Inspired by Jacob's compassion and dedication, they eagerly joined forces to make a difference in the lives of the stray dogs. During recess and lunch breaks, Jacob's friends spread the word about the food drive, encouraging their classmates to donate whatever they could to help the shelter animals. They set up donation bins around the school, decorated with colourful posters and signs to attract attention. And as word spread throughout the school, students from all grade levels began to contribute to the cause. Some brought in bags of dog food, while others donated blankets, toys, and even monetary donations to support the shelter. As the momentum for the food drive grew within the school, an unexpected hindrance emerged in the form of Vice Principal Mrs. Lawson.
Known for her strict demeanour and unwavering adherence to school policies, Mrs. Lawson viewed the food drive as a distraction that would interfere with the students' academic focus. During a school assembly, Mrs. Lawson took to the podium, her voice stern and authoritative. "I understand the noble intentions behind this food drive," she began, her gaze sweeping over the gathered students. "But we must prioritise our academic pursuits above all else. Any extracurricular activities, including charity efforts, will only serve as distractions and detract from your studies." Jacob felt a knot form in his stomach as he listened to Mrs. Lawson's words. He knew the food drive was important, but he also understood the value of education. After the assembly, Jacob approached Mrs. Lawson, his heart pounding with nervousness.
"Mrs. Lawson, please," he pleaded, his voice trembling slightly. "The food drive is for a good cause. It's important to me and many others."
Mrs. Lawson regarded Jacob with a stern expression, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Jacob, I appreciate your passion, but we cannot afford to compromise on the academic standards of the school," she replied firmly. "I am afraid I cannot support this initiative." Disheartened, but undeterred, Jacob sought the support of his fellow students and teachers who shared his passion for helping stray dogs. Together they organised meetings and presented their case to the school administration, emphasising the educational value of compassion and community service. Despite the initial resistance from Vice Principal Mrs. Lawson, the determination and passion of the students and teachers to help the stray dogs could not be ignored. As word of their efforts reached the ears of the school principal, he recognised the importance of supporting their initiative. Calling Mrs. Lawson into his office, the principal expressed his decision with unwavering authority. "Mrs. Lawson, I've heard about the students' and teachers' commitment to organising the food drive for the stray dogs," he said, his tone firm but understanding. "It is clear that this initiative holds great value not only in terms of charity, but also in teaching our students important lessons about compassion and community service." Mrs. Lawson, though initially resistant, understood the principal's perspective. "But, sir, what about the academic focus of our students?" she asked, voicing her concerns. The principal nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, academic priorities remain important, however. Fostering a sense of social responsibility and empathy in our students is equally valuable," he replied. "I believe we can strike a balance between academic rigour and extracurricular activities." With the principal's support, Mrs. Lawson had no choice but to acquiesce. "Understood, sir," she said, her tone conceding defeat. "I will ensure that the food drive is carried out smoothly and with minimal disruption to our academic schedule." And so, with the principal's endorsements, the food drive was officially given the green light. Jacob and his classmates rejoiced at the news, grateful for the opportunity to make a positive impact on the lives of the stray dogs. As the school community rallied together to collect donations and support the cause, they demonstrated the power of unity and compassion. With the principal's blessing, they embarked on their mission with renewed determination, knowing that their efforts would make a meaningful difference in the lives of the animals they sought to help. Jacob's heart swelled with pride as he watched his classmates come together to support the food drive. He was touched by their generosity and kindness, knowing that each donation would make a real difference in the lives of the stray dogs.
"Thank you, everyone, for your support," Jacob said, addressing his classmates during morning assembly. "Your donations will help ensure that the dogs at the shelter have everything they need to be happy and healthy." His friends cheered and applauded, their smiles reflecting the sense of accomplishment and pride they felt
in knowing they had made a positive impact on the lives of others. Throughout the food drive, Jacob and his friends continued to collect donations and spread awareness about the importance of helping animals in need. Together, they proved that even the smallest act of kindness could make a big difference in the world. As the final donations were collected and delivered to the shelter, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude and fulfillment. He knew that, with the support of his school friends and community, they had truly made a difference in the lives of the shelter animals, giving them hope and a chance for a better future. Their efforts continued, and the stray dogs began to thrive, with regular meals, medical care, and plenty of love and attention. They grew healthier and happier each day. One afternoon, as Dan, Martha, and Jacob visited the shelter to check on their furry friends, they were greeted with wagging tails and joyful barks. The shelter manager smiled as she watched them interact with the dogs.
"Thanks to your help, these dogs have a second chance at life," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've made a real difference."
Tears welled in Martha's eyes as she looked around at the dogs they had helped save.
"We're just happy to be able to help," she replied.
Jacob beamed with pride, knowing that he had played a part in giving these animals a brighter future.
"Oh, it feels good to know we made a difference,"
he said, his voice filled with emotion. As they bid farewell to the dogs at the shelter, a sense of fulfillment washed over Dan, Martha, and Jacob. They knew that their journey to help animals in need was just beginning, and they were determined to continue their efforts with even greater passion and dedication. Walking out of the shelter, Dan placed a comforting hand on Jacob's shoulder, a proud smile lighting up his face.
"You've done something truly special, Jacob," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've shown us all the power of compassion and kindness."
Jacob beamed with pride at his father's words, his heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment.
"Thanks, Dad,"
he replied, his voice filled with gratitude.
"I couldn't have done it without your support."
Martha wrapped her arms around her family, her eyes shining with love and pride. "I'm so proud of you both," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Together we've made a real difference in the lives of these animals." As they walked home together, their hearts full of hope and determination, Dan, Martha, and Jacob knew that their journey was far from over. They would continue to advocate for animals in need, spreading love and compassion wherever they went. Whether it was volunteering at the shelter, organising food drives, or simply lending a helpful hand to a furry friend in need, they knew that every act of kindness mattered. And with their hearts full of hope and their spirits soaring, they set out to make the world a better place for all creatures, big and small. As they journeyed forward, hand in hand, they knew that together they could overcome any obstacle and make a lasting impact on the world around them. In the end, it was their love for each other and their shared commitment to making a difference that would light the way forward, guiding them on their path to a brighter and more compassionate future. With the stray dogs safely in the care of the shelter, Jacob felt a sense of contentment wash over him, though he missed his daily visits to the school gates. Knowing that the dogs are in a safe and loving environment brought him peace of mind. As he returned to his daily routine, Jacob found himself more focused and determined than ever before. With the weight of his secret lifted from his shoulders, he was able to fully immerse himself in his studies and school activities. At lunchtime, Jacob no longer felt the need to share his food with the stray dogs. Instead, he savoured each bite, savouring the flavours and enjoying the nourishment his mother had lovingly prepared for him. Martha watched with pride as Jacob's appetite returned, his once empty lunchbox now filled with the remnants of a well-enjoyed meal. "I'm so glad to see you eating properly again, Jacob," she said, her voice filled with warmth and affection. Jacob smiled up at his mother, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Mum," he replied, his voice tinged with contentment.
I'm just happy knowing the dogs are safe now. As Jacob focused on his schoolwork and enjoyed his meals with newfound appreciation, his parents couldn't help but marvel at the remarkable transformation their son had undergone. With his compassionate heart leading the way, Jacob had not only made a difference in the lives of the stray dogs, but had also grown and matured in ways they never imagined possible. With Jacob's renewed focus on school and his healthier eating habits, Martha took extra care in preparing his meal according to his appetite. She made sure to include his favourite dishes and nutritious snacks to fuel his growing body and mind. Each morning, Martha lovingly packed Jacob's lunchbox, filling it with an array of delicious and wholesome foods, from sandwiches filled with his favourite fillings to fresh fruit and homemade treats. She spared no effort in ensuring that Jacob's meals were both satisfying and nourishing. When Jacob opened his lunchbox at school, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of the mouth-watering delights waiting for him inside. He eagerly dug into his meal, savouring each bite and appreciating the effort his mother had put into preparing it for him.
Wow, Mum, this sandwich is amazing!
Jacob exclaimed one day, his eyes lighting up with delight as he took a bite.
And these cookies are the best I've ever tasted!
Martha beamed with pride at her son's words, her heart swelling with happiness. I'm so glad you like it, Jacob, she replied, her voice filled with warmth and affection. I just want to make sure you have everything you need to stay happy and healthy. As Jacob continued to enjoy his meals with gusto, Martha couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment, knowing she was able to provide for her son in such a meaningful way. As she watched him grow and thrive, she knew that her efforts were more than worth it, for there was nothing she wouldn't do for the happiness and well-being of her beloved Jacob. Jacob's journey with his lunchbox had come full circle, from being a source of mystery and concern to becoming a symbol of love and care. Each day, as he packed his lunch with the same care and attention his mother put into preparing it, Jacob carried with him a reminder of the stray dogs he had helped and the community that had rallied around him. As he sat down to eat his lunch each day, Jacob felt a sense of pride, knowing that his actions had made the difference. His once empty Tiffin now symbolized the kindness and compassion that he and his community had shown towards those in need. The empty Tiffin had become a conversation starter, leading to discussions about the importance of helping others and the impact that small acts of kindness can have. It had brought his family closer together as they worked as a team to support Jacob in his efforts, but most importantly, Jacob's empty Tiffin had become a source of inspiration for others. It served as a reminder that sometimes the biggest surprises lie hidden beneath the surface, and that a simple act of kindness can ripple outwards, touching the lives of many. As Jacob looked at his empty Tiffin, he knew that it was more than just a lunchbox. It was a symbol of love, care, and compassion, reminding him of the incredible things that can happen when people come together to make a difference. As he continued on his journey, he carried that message within him, a beacon of hope and kindness in a sometimes challenging world. In the years that followed the dramatic events surrounding the stray dogs, Jacob's passion for animal welfare only grew stronger. Inspired by his experiences, he dedicated himself to making a difference in the lives of animals everywhere. With the support of his family and community, Jacob became actively involved in various animal welfare organisations, volunteering his time and expertise to support their causes. He worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the plight of animals, speaking out against abuse and advocating for their rights. As long as there are animals in need, I'll never stop fighting for them, Jacob declared, his voice filled with conviction. They deserve our love and protection, and I won't rest until they receive it. With each campaign and initiative he spearheaded, Jacob inspired others to join him in his mission. Together we can make a difference, he would say, rallying his fellow activists to action. We have the power to change the world for the better, one animal at a time. Jacob's efforts did not go unnoticed.
He quickly gained recognition for his activism, earning accolades and awards for his contributions to the field of animal welfare. But for Jacob, the true award came from knowing that he was making a tangible difference in the lives of animals in need. And as he witnessed the impact of his efforts firsthand, Jacob's resolve only strengthened.
"This is just the beginning," he would say, his eyes shining with determination. "There's still so much more we can do to create a world where animals are treated with the kindness and respect they deserve."
As he grew older, Jacob continued to expand his impact, working closely with animal shelters and rescue organizations to provide care and support for animals in need. He helped to establish new shelters, organize adoption drives, and launch campaigns to raise funds for animal welfare initiatives. But perhaps Jacob's greatest legacy was the inspiration he provided to others. Through his unwavering commitment and compassion, he inspired countless individuals to join the fight for animal rights, creating a ripple effect that spread far and wide. Years later, as Jacob reflected on his journey, he knew that he had found his true calling. Though the road had been long and challenging, he was grateful for every twist and turn that had led him to where he was today. And as he looked to the future, Jacob was filled with hope and determination, knowing that there was still so much work to be done. With his passion, perseverance, and the support of his community behind him, he was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that together they could create a brighter future for all creatures big and small. With every step he took, Jacob carried with him the memories of the stray dogs he had fought to save, a constant reminder of the importance of compassion and empathy in a world that often forgets the value of all living beings. As he continued on his journey, he knew that his work was far from over, but with each victory, no matter how small, he was one step closer to his ultimate goal. A world where every animal could live a life free from suffering and cruelty. As Martha and Dan witnessed Jacob's tireless dedication to animal welfare and his remarkable contributions to the community, they couldn't help but swell with pride. Their once timid son had blossomed into a compassionate and determined young man, making a tangible difference in the lives of animals and inspiring those around him to do the same. "He's truly remarkable, isn't he?" Martha remarked to Dan one evening, her eyes shining with pride as they watched Jacob passionately advocate for animal rights on television. "To think that he's accomplished so much at a young age, it's truly inspiring." Dan nodded in agreement, a smile spreading across his face as he watched their son speak eloquently about the importance of protecting animals from harm.
"He's always had a kind heart," Dan replied, his voice filled with pride. "But to see him channel that kindness into action, it's nothing short of extraordinary."
As they listened to Jacob's impassioned speeches and witnessed his unwavering commitment to the cause, Martha and Dan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and gratitude. Their son had found his calling, and he was making the most of it, leaving a lasting impact on the world around him. "We're so lucky to have him as our son," Martha said, her voice filled with emotion as she reached for Dan's hand. "He's making the world a better place, one animal at a time." Dan squeezed Martha's hand affectionately, his heart swelling with pride.
"Yes, we are,"
he replied, his voice filled with pride.
"And I do not doubt that he'll continue to do amazing things in the years to come."
As they watched Jacob continue to advocate for animals with unwavering determination, Martha and Dan knew that their son's legacy would live on, inspiring future generations to follow in his footsteps and make a difference in the world. And as they looked toward the future, they couldn't help but feel grateful for the remarkable young man they were fortunate enough to call their son.